I stood on my front porch with a quiet, composed smile, while my son-in-law Richard looked back at me like a man who had already counted his winnings. His parents had just pulled up in a large rental truck, laughing and animated, fully prepared to move their belongings into my home as though the deed had always been in their name. My daughter Claire had married him 7 months earlier, and from nearly the beginning, the two of them had treated my home in suburban Indiana like it was simply the next chapter in a plan they'd already written. They never asked. They just assumed. Welcome to Behind Dad. If you connect with real stories about family, loyalty, betrayal, and fathers who refuse to back down when it matters most, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. This one will stay with you until the final word. Richard climbed out of the passenger seat with that familiar confidence, waving his parents forward like he was ushering them into a grand estate. His mother was already gesturing toward the garage, deciding which section she preferred. His father scanned the property with the satisfied expression of a man taking inventory of something he already owned. I didn't say a word. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching calmly as they began unloading boxes onto the driveway. The atmosphere was charged. They had clearly decided I was the agreeable, soft-spoken father-in-law who would step aside quietly and let it all happen. They were about to discover just how mistaken that assumption was. When they finally made their way up to the porch, Richard looked me over with that practiced smirk and said, "Well, Gary, we're finally doing this. It's all becoming official today, right?" I reached into my jacket pocket, withdrew a neatly folded document, and held it out to him without a word. He chuckled at first, assuming it was some kind of gesture, maybe a welcome note or a joke. He unfolded it and began reading aloud so his parents could follow along. They leaned in, reading carefully, and then, one by one, the color drained completely from their faces. The driveway fell absolutely silent. No one had seen it coming. It had all begun about 2 months after Claire and Richard's wedding. Initially, Richard had presented himself well. He held a steady position, spoke respectfully, and gave every impression of being someone who genuinely cared for my daughter. But gradually, the performance began to slip. Small comments started surfacing. Remarks about how fortunate Claire was to have access to a home with so much space, how practical it would be for everyone to eventually share it. His parents began appearing more frequently, and their hints became less subtle with each visit. Conversations kept circling back to how burdensome rent had become, and how natural it would be to consolidate everyone under one roof as a unified family. Then, one Sunday evening at dinner, Richard looked directly at me and said, "You know, Gary, once you're ready to slow down, this house would work beautifully for all of us. There's more than enough room." His parents nodded as though it had already been agreed upon. Claire shifted in her seat and stayed quiet, choosing peace over confrontation. I smiled and redirected the conversation. But sitting across from them, I felt a cold clarity settle in. I had given 36 years of my working life to build that home, not to hand it over to people who had never invested a single day of effort into it. That evening, I made my decision. The following morning, I contacted my attorney and began taking action. I had the property transferred into a protected trust in Claire's name, updated all relevant legal documentation, and made the entire arrangement airtight. While the legal work was underway, I also quietly began looking into Richard's background. What I found was more than I expected. He had been terminated from his previous 2 positions for financial misconduct, theft from his employers. The salary he had casually referenced in conversation bore little resemblance to what he was actually earning. And his parents, far from being in genuine financial hardship, simply had no interest in paying for something they believed they could obtain for free. I kept every piece of this to myself. Around them, I remained entirely unchanged, warm, accommodating, even helping carry a few boxes when asked. Claire had no idea what was coming. She still believed her husband was the man she had chosen to build a life with. I carried the truth quietly and waited for the right moment. When that truck rolled into my driveway that morning, I was completely prepared. The note was brief, direct, and unambiguous. This property is no longer held in my name. It was transferred into a legal trust in Claire's name 2 months ago. You are not welcome here. Any attempt to move personal belongings onto this property or to harass any member of this family will result in immediate legal action and a formal trespassing complaint filed with local law enforcement. The locks have been changed. Richard looked up from the page, his face flushed with shock, then quickly hardening into anger. What is this, Gary? What did you do? His voice carried down the driveway. His mother pressed her hand over her mouth. His father stood motionless, staring at nothing in particular, as though the ground had shifted beneath him. I kept my voice even and my expression calm. You spent months planning to move into a home that was never going to be yours. My daughter deserves far better than a husband who saw her as a means to a free address. Claire had heard the raised voices and stepped outside. She looked between us, confused, then took the note from Richard's hand and read it herself. The moment the full meaning registered, her eyes filled with tears. Richard immediately attempted to reframe everything, calling me irrational, insisting I had misunderstood the entire situation. His parents echoed him, pivoting to outrage, accusing me of being cold and unreasonable. But I had arrived at this moment with documentation, printed bank records, a series of private text messages between Richard and his parents, exchanged in the months following the wedding, in which they openly discussed their timeline and strategy for taking over the house. Screenshots of the fabrications he had told Claire about his career and finances. Neighbors had quietly gathered near their driveways. The moving truck sat with its rear door open, going nowhere. The confidence Richard had walked in with had completely evaporated. What remained was something smaller, desperation dressed up as indignation. He attempted to appeal to sympathy, claiming they had no alternative plan, no backup. I told him that problem belonged entirely to him. I gave them 6 hours to reload the truck and vacate my property. Claire stood beside me through all of it, and for the first time in months, I saw something shift in her expression. Not pain, but clarity, like someone finally seeing a room clearly after the lights have been switched on. The days that followed were heavy and emotional, but they were necessary. Claire moved back into her old bedroom while she began processing everything. She cried often in those first days, but as she worked through the evidence piece by piece, the lies about his employment, the calculated conversations between Richard and his parents, the timeline they had constructed, something in her began to harden in the right direction. Richard cycled through every approach he had available. Anger and threats first, then appeals, then promises of change delivered through tearful voicemails. His parents made one appearance, attempting to appeal to Claire's sense of loyalty and forgiveness. I reminded them, calmly, of the document they had already read and the legal position they were standing on. Then Claire filed for an annulment. She found a strong attorney, took control of her finances, and began making decisions entirely on her own terms. Watching that happen was one of the most significant things I've witnessed as a father. Richard and his parents scrambled to find a solution, and eventually settled into a cramped one-bedroom unit across town. The moving truck had backed out of my driveway that same evening, empty. The quiet that came after them leaving was one of the most complete silences I have ever experienced. In the evenings that followed, Claire and I sat on the back porch for hours. We talked about all of it, what she had missed, what she had chosen to overlook, what she deserved instead. She thanked me for acting when she couldn't see the situation clearly enough to act herself. I told her what I believed to be true. A father's job isn't just to support his child through the good moments. It's to stand in front of the difficult ones when they're not yet ready to face them alone. The light gradually came back into her eyes. Slowly, and then more steadily, she began to look like herself again. 6 months have passed since that morning on the driveway. Claire is doing well, genuinely well. She's confident, clear-headed, and building something new on her own terms. She's still at home while she saves, but she's already exploring her own options and planning her next chapter with real intention behind it. Richard reached out one final time with another round of apologies. She blocked him and has not looked back once. Last I heard, he and his parents are still adjusting to life in that small apartment. I carry no regret about how any of this unfolded. Sometimes the most important thing a parent can do is make the decision no one else in the room is willing to make. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. That single document, handed over quietly on a Tuesday morning, changed the entire trajectory of my daughter's life. I would do it again without a moment's hesitation. If you're a parent watching this, don't be afraid to act when the people around your child aren't who they claim to be. And if you've navigated something similar, entitled family members, a relationship that was never what it appeared, drop your story in the comments. I read every one. Share this with any father, any daughter, or anyone who needs the reminder that protecting the people you love is never something to apologize for. Thank you for watching all the way through. I'm Gary, and this is my story. If someone is quietly taking advantage of your generosity or your family, trust what you're seeing and do something about it. Stay strong. I'll see you in the next one.